Welcome to the Hockey Writers Maple Leafs Lounge, a weekly show from our Toronto Maple Leafs writing crew, bringing you the latest news, rumors, trades, player grades, prospects, and much more. From training camp to the playoffs, from draft day to the trade deadline, our team covers everything that happens with the blue and white. Come on in and pull up a chair. Welcome to the Maple Leafs Lounge.
Welcome inside the lounge, everybody. I'm your host, Kevin Armstrong, joined as always by my good friends and colleagues, Peter Baracchini and Alex Hobson. We've got a jam-packed show today to talk about because this is quite a team on a tear with lots of things to talk about, lots of good things to talk about, and a few complications that are coming up. So quick rundown of what we're going to be doing. Joseph Woll, how does his emergence change the outlook of the Leafs going forward? Ilya Mikheyev is due back December 5th, coming off the LTIR. How does that change the lineup? And then what's happened in that top six? And should the forwards go back with the Willie and the Auston, or does Auston stay with Mitch and JT? You know what I'm talking about, and all that mixing and matching of those elite players. So that's what we're going to talk about. And then we're going to be joined by a special guest to talk a little bit of trade talk. We had this last week with the Pittsburgh Penguins and a supposed fire sale coming. There's another team out there that could start pulling some trades and maybe should start at least firing some people. So we'll get to that as well. So let's start it up, guys. We're going to start actually right to you two, because you're both kind of on different sides of this. Peter, you just put out an article about the emergence of Joseph Woll. I'm going to say I caught it in May when I saw the 57 save performance of Joseph Woll, and I was like, well, my article said the future is bright in the Leafs crease. Not going to say I told you so, but
you told us so.
No, but he's been looking great. Who could have thought 3-0 to start? And Peter, you pick up the story from there. How does that change the outlook?
It definitely makes the competition more tight, especially if for that backup role. I mean, the Maple Leafs brought in Peter Mrazek to try and bring that reassurance and make a very strong tandem with him and Jack Campbell, hopefully split the difference in terms of starts. He probably gets 20, 30 starts to alleviate some of the pressure off Campbell, make a lighter workload. And early on in the season, he's just been dealt with the same injury. He injured his groin against Ottawa Senators and they re-aggravated it about a month later. So it's like, where do you go from here? But unfortunately, as you mentioned, Joseph Woll, he had that stellar game that you watched and you wrote about him. And it seems that he's coming into his own right now. Early on in the season with the Marlies, he was 2-1. Goals against average is 3.38, 895 save percentage. His career totals with the Marlies hasn't been that great because, he's dealt with some inconsistencies, adjusting to the level and everything like that. But it seems that, as I mentioned, he's starting to, get comfortable, get acclimated to the pro level. And we're seeing it right now with his confidence, his poise, his movement, his puck tracking. It's just on a different level. And you see it in his numbers and the way that he plays. His confidence is sky high right now. He has it from his teammates. He has it from the coach, the staff, the GM, which is why they called him up in the first place. And I think right now we're starting to see, more competition coming from the players in the minors who are going to be battling for that spot right now. And it's going to be difficult considering Mrazek's on contract for another 3 years. And, they definitely need to, or another 2 years after this, they really need to figure out how to deal with the situation if there's a worst case scenario and he's still injured.
So, Alex, I know you guys kind of had a funny tweet battle earlier this week with this timing of this, but you're saying it's great for Woll, but let's calm down the situation here a little bit, if you can take it from there.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I don't want to take anything away from what Joseph Woll has done. I think anyone who looks at the numbers that he had in the AHL, not just this year, but in the 3 years that he's been playing in the AHL, I don't think anyone would have expected him to come to the NHL and win his first 3 games and get his first shutout in his second game. So it has nothing to do with the way that Joseph Woll's playing, but I think, like you said, Peter, when Dubas signed Mrazek to that 3-year contract at 3.8 per, he was signing him to be the 1B goalie. And I know that everyone's kind of quick to move on from Mrazek already because he's only played 2 games, wasn't particularly great in either game that he played in, and he got injured immediately after both games. So I know that's pretty frustrating from a fan's perspective, but at the same time, he is a hell of a lot more established than Joseph Woll is. And as much as, Woll is showing serious promise this year, and he's looking like a guy who, maybe in the next couple of years, you can use him as your backup goalie for a cheap price. If the Leafs were to, and hypothetically, if the Leafs were to trade Peter Mrazek right now, yes, they would free up the cap room, but let's not forget that Jack Campbell, as great as he's been this year, has been pretty injury prone in the past too. And I'm obviously, knock on wood, so far this year, he's been able to stay healthy, which we're all fortunate for, and he's been doing a great job. But I don't know. If Jack Campbell goes down, I am not confident at all in its tandem of Joseph Woll and Michael Hutchinson. And I know that's what they would run with if they traded Mrazek and then Jack Campbell got injured. And, having that dependable third goalie is a big part of this team. And it's a big part of having a strong contending team going into the playoffs. And while, yes, Mrazek hasn't really impressed this year because he's been injured for most of it, I think at the very least, you got to give him a chance to come back and really claim that back goalie role. If there is a trade to be made, at any point, it would have to come in the offseason once the Leafs have seen that Joseph Woll can serve as a good backup goalie. But I wouldn't see a trade for Mrazek happening right now.
And let's not forget, too, the fact that remember what happened the last time they had an established goaltender in Curtis McElhinney, and they waived him in hoping that Garrett Sparks can come in and, be a young goaltender and assume that role. You don't want to jump the gun with that because we all know what happened with Sparks that season. He did not have the performance, and the Leafs were right back at square one. So you don't want to give up the depth that you wanted to bring in the offseason, in which you did. And then if you do that, then you're back at square one. And it's not to say that Joseph Woll is going to be a Garrett Sparks, because, you're starting to see the more that he plays, the more of a sample size you're going to have. But right now, the promise is there. Obviously, Mrazek is going to be the guy. There's no shame in that. But let's face it, at some point, Joseph Woll is going to be on this roster in the near future.
Which is great. It's been a while since the Leafs have had a homegrown prospect come through. Yeah. And that's the one thing that I noticed with Sheldon Keefe talking a few days ago and talking about Woll, and he's liking him. And he said he's developing great. He's a good looking prospect. He still is using that term. So Keefe is not going to be trying to speed that process up at all. He's more than happy to let him develop. So great to have that in the system. Make sure that you subscribe to the morning skate at thehockeywriters.com. That is into your inbox every morning with lots of different snippets and scores and everything else going on in the NHL. And like and subscribe to this YouTube channel. So next up is Ilya Mikheyev, possibly the most unlucky Maple Leaf in recent history. You can't help but feel bad for this guy. We don't need to do the whole rundown of the system, but basically he was going to get his chance in the top 6 by all indications. Got injured in the last regular season game and preseason game, and so be it. That's what's happened. But now you're looking at a team that is firing on all cylinders. Looks really good. Players have meshed. Ilya Mikheyev is kind of the odd man out. So when he comes back, and it's right now that's scheduled for December 5th, when he comes back, there's a few different complications. The books, because he's got 1.65 million, and then the lineup. You're looking at the lineup, and where does he go at this point? I just did a story on this a couple days ago, guys, and it was pretty wild to see the amount of response. And people were like, he's a top 6, he's a 4th liner, waive him, trade him. Everyone's all over the map. And I think that just goes to show that with Mikheyev, we've seen really good stuff out of him, and then we've seen not so great stuff, and no one really knows where to peg this guy and where he should be at this point. So Alex, how about we start with you? What do you see this situation unfolding with Mikheyev?
I personally think that there's a spot waiting for him on the 3rd line, left wing, next to David Kampf and Andre Kasha with his name on it. I know that we've been seeing that line run with Pierre Engvall in a spot this year, and no disrespect to Pierre Engvall. I think he's been fine this year, but at the same time, I also think he's probably been the most underwhelming forward. He hasn't really contributed much on offense aside from the first game of the year and the last game. And, or was it the game against, it was the game against the Kings, I believe. Either way, recent game where he had 2 points. That's been the extent of his offense this year. And, he has been solid defensively. He's been good on that line, but I think if we can all agree on one thing besides how unlucky Mikheyev is and how snake bitten he was last year and how much he couldn't finish, Mikheyev was one of their best defensive forwards last year. And, when you bring him back, you're bringing in a guy who can contribute on the penalty kill. You're bringing back a guy who outskated freaking Connor McDavid. So I think the Leafs have potential to do a lot of damage with him on their third line there. I'm not even going to begin to question the books because I'm sure Dubas and Brandon Pridham have this master plan to make the money work when Ilya Mikheyev comes back. But I do think that he's going to get a look in the lineup because, like you said, Kevin, he was supposed to get that chance early on this year. And I know that the Leafs aren't making any lineup decisions based on Ilya Mikheyev's feelings, but you have to imagine that for a guy like Kyle Dubas, who genuinely cares about his players and Ilya Mikheyev being one of them, you have to imagine that he's at least going to get a chance on that third line. And I'd understand it if every single player was clicking and every single player was finding success. But like I said, Engvall hasn't really had that offensive success this year. And, him and Mikheyev kind of play a similar style of game. So I think we're probably going to see him slot in on the third line, at least get a look there and potentially even get an opportunity to slot in the top six. But to start, I think he's going to find his way back into the bottom six. I don't really see them trading him or losing him in any way.
Peter?
Yeah, Alex basically nailed everything on the head. And the one thing that I noticed with Pierre Engvall too, you notice his size when he's on the ice too. Like he's a big guy. I mean, 6'5", 214 pounds, and yet he doesn't really use that to his advantage, especially when he's in the corners, when he's coming out and he's got pressure. And it seems like a play always, dies on his stick, and it doesn't amount to anything, and the offensive opportunity is, negated. So everyone's talking about how Mikheyev is snake bitten as well. Well, Pierre Engvall really hasn't done a whole lot offensively as well, and you're seeing the numbers where most of that line is being driven by Kasha and Kampf. So the fact that you have two exceptionally great skaters, I mean, you have a smooth, I mean, I was overwhelmed or, enthralled with the way that David Kampf skated, because I thought that was an underrated aspect of his game this year. So you have that with the speed of Kasha, and you throw Ilya Mikheyev on that other wing. You have three really strong skaters. And I mentioned this on the 6 and the 6. This line is going to be absolutely lethal when given the opportunity. And I do think that once Mikheyev comes back, Engvall is going to be the odd man out, because as much as we like to rag on Nick Ritchie because of the fact that, he hasn't scored and he's seeing his own struggles, he's getting his chances. He's still trying. And again, there's another snake bitten forward, but I think you got to keep him in sort of that fourth line role. And Pierre Engvall is going to be the one of the odd man out, who most likely, I think, would be more likely to be traded than Ritchie or Mikheyev at this point. So the fact that he's going to be coming back, you're still going to have a really solid third line. It just makes sense. And the fact that you could use him on the PK more than Pierre Engvall at this point, it just makes him more versatile and more, in terms of X's and O's in the game plan for Sheldon Keefe, because Pierre Engvall, and even on the power play too, Pierre Engvall hasn't looked that great aside from that one power play goal that he had in the first game against the Montreal Canadiens. And I know Alex has touched on this, how he wants to try and see somebody else other than Engvall, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. So in all aspects of the game, Pierre Engvall has been fine. It's just they need more out of him, and they're just not getting it.
Yeah, he was one of the three that I put. Wayne Simmons was another one, because we did see him be a healthy scratch, but that has worked wonders for Wayne Simmons, because he's come back and looked like the guy we hoped he would be. And Nick Ritchie, as 4 assists, despite having all that top line time and playing with some very skilled players. He's got 4 assists. I don't know. I'm not sure how that's working out. And the other thought on this is, do you trade Mikheyev? He's in his last year. of his contract. He wanted to be traded before. And just look for some draft picks at this point, because you don't know how he's going to come back. Maybe that thumb's not great. Maybe there's a team out there that says, yeah, we'll give you a couple draft picks to take a look at him and get him re-signed. Because you look at the Maple Leafs next draft, they've got 3 picks in the 7 rounds. Mm-hmm. They could use some draft picks coming up. So any thoughts on that front?
I don't necessarily disagree. And it wouldn't be the end of the world. I don't think certainly wouldn't they be getting draft picks in return, but if they pulled that trade off, I don't think anyone would have an overly negative opinion on it. But I don't think that Kyle Dubas would have gone out of his way to ensure Mikheyev that there's a spot for him on this team and that they want him to be in Toronto, only to trade him before he can even come back and have a chance to prove himself. So I don't think they'll trade him before he gets healthy. But I could see a scenario where if he comes back from his thumb injury and he's just doesn't look the same, and his same story as last year, just can't convert, just can't make anything of his chances. In that case, I could see the Leafs trading him to a team maybe where he can get a fresh start at the deadline, because I know there will be some teams that will be able to give him that opportunity by then. But I don't think they'll trade him before he gets a chance to come back and try and prove himself again.
All right. Make sure that you follow all on your social media contracts. Look what my head is right there right now. Social media channels, the Hockey Writers, and follow along. We're always posting our articles and lots of things to talk about. The other thing to talk about this week is when things are looking this good, there's still been changes made, even in the middle of this really good streak. It went from Auston and Mitch being separated and Nylander on the top line, and now it's back to Auston and Mitch on the top line, and they're winning and everything's looking good. So it's hard to say what's not working. But I said it on the show a few weeks ago, guys, I really like the Auston and Nylander matchup. I just like it better than the Mitch and Auston. It just looks more dangerous to me. They can both just rifle it. Mitch, you always know he's going to pass. With Nylander, he's a shoot first kind of guy. But then when he surprises you with the pass, Austin's wide open. Like I just like that dynamic. So where are you guys at this right now? Are you guys leaving it with Auston, Mitch, JT, and Willie Styles, or where are you? Take it from there, Peter.
Yeah, I know Leaf Land is always in a buzz, especially when they see Mitch Marner back with Auston Matthews and Nylander with Tavares. I guess I'm one of the ones that also complained of this as well, because you had success with Nylander and Matthews, and then Tavares and Marner together. So at this point right now, I've come to the conclusion that, we could all have the same notion that we all want to see Nylander with Matthews because of the success that they had, Marner and Tavares with the success that they've had in the past. But at the same time, it doesn't really matter at this point, because if you put Marner with Matthews or Tavares, he's going to succeed. You put Nylander with Marner or Tavares, they're going to succeed. So in the event where you know that they're going to be hot for a really long stretch, great, keep them together. But as soon as you see things start to cool down with them, then you make that switch, because then it just motivates them even more. And I think that's why Sheldon Keefe said that he demoted Nylander to the second line, because Nylander said that he feels that he needs to be pushed even more to try and be motivated and get back to that top line spot. So I think now you have a coach now that, wants to see a player at his best. So maybe that's why he's doing it. But at the same time, whoever's on that right side with Auston Matthews, I've just come to the conclusion that it doesn't matter, because both players are going to succeed. And if things get cold, then you make the switch. And the fact that you could have both right wingers step into that line or into that wheelhouse along his wing or their wings, because we have two really great centers, it's just going to throw the competition off even more. And the fact that they're both unpredictable, well, not so much Marner because he always passed first, but the fact that Nylander can be predictable, whether he's with Tavares or Matthews, just makes it even more deadly. I mean, we saw that goal against San Jose, 32 seconds in. Puck crosses the line. Tavares just makes a nice tap pass to Nylander. He's in on a break, and then he just buries it on James Reimer. So you have that chemistry right there. They've had the chemistry last year. It's going to work. If it doesn't, then you know what? Switch them back up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they have kind of played interchangeably. They all play on the first power play unit together. Keefe will always mess around with lines during the game. So yeah, it's a hard one because it's not wrong. There's no wrong at this point, it seems. Alex?
Yeah, I'm more or less in the same boat as Peter. I mean, the way I look at it is like if you have a car and you've got two sets of tires and your car can run based on whichever set of tires is on the car, what's the point of having a debate of which set of tires you should use if both work, right? And that conversation may have been different earlier on this year when Matthews and Marner were noticeably struggling, and obviously Keefe picked up on that and he switched them up and things started working out. But at this point, I'm with you, Kevin, in the sense that I still prefer overall the Matthews Nylander pairing and the Marner Tavares pairing. I feel like when Matthews and Marner play together, I feel like sometimes they can combine for the most creative, nicest plays you've ever seen. But I think a lot of the time as well, they look like they're playing shinny out there. And, they'll try these little creative touch passes or these little, they'll try and look too cute, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And they'll turn the puck over. And I think that's the one fallback. But at the same time, the Leafs are on what? How many games have they won in a row at this point? Like 4
or 5, I think.
4 or 5. Yeah. So either way, they're on a winning streak, and it's like, so if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I mean, I wouldn't go out of my way to put Nylander back on the top line just for the purpose of making a change. But I do agree that Matthews and Nylander and Marner Tavares probably work better as pairings. But like we said, like, all the pairings, like no matter how you want to match them up, like they're all working right now. So in the end, I don't think Keefe should be in a rush to change it unless things visibly stop working. But I think if it does slow down, at least you have that option. So
3-game winning streak. I forgot we lost to the Penguins again.
Yeah, that's what I was trying to think of the amount of games that were in between that.
Penguins and it's 13 wins out of the last 15.
Right.
If you're watching this on Sunday. So yeah, they're looking really good. That's why this is kind of a hard topic, but I miss that 88-34 line. I thought it looked so good. But you know what? Sheldon Keefe is a great coach, and he is the fastest coach in Leafs history with his record now in the first 125 games. I've got to look up the exact stat, but this guy knows what he's doing. You're talking about a franchise with more than 100 years of history, and he's now the most wins in that time period. So yeah, he knows what he's doing. Things are looking good, so we can't really argue about it, but
77, 35, and 13. That's his record in 125 games. And people want to, fire him. Record speaks for itself. The fact that he's got all 4 lines firing on all 4 cylinders right now, that's what you want. Those are the results that you expect.
And that he's able to, he knows his players. Like he sat Wayne Simmons, and Wayne Simmons was not happy about it. And look at Wayne Simmons now. Like he looks totally different player out there. So yeah.
Wayne Simmons before his injury last year.
Exactly.
Definitely.
Yeah. Wayne Train seems to be back. Okay. We're going to do some TV magic here and have our special guest in to talk a little bit of fantasy trading. All right. The TV magic brought in Mathew Zator. He is the writer covering the Vancouver Canucks for the Hockey Writers and lots of different places for the Hockey Writers, actually. But he lives and breathes Vancouver Canucks hockey, and that's been a difficult thing for fans lately. It's a frustrating thing to watch. Now, last week we had on that there had been discussion around the Penguins that maybe they're going to start a rebuild. They've went on a bit of a tear since then, and that seems like that's unlikely to happen. But we kind of pegged players on the Penguins that we would like to come to Toronto. Now we're going to do it with Mathew and the Vancouver Canucks, because if there's a team that needs a shakeup, it is the Vancouver Canucks. Looking at this roster, they've got some great players. We talked earlier about what's going on when you have that kind of talent. But Mathew, maybe before we get into what players we want from there, tell us how realistic it is for Vancouver to start trading at this point, or is this going to be a front office move out and try to get that talent working first?
I mean, it's hard to tell right now because there's just so much going on. Front office coaching, it just makes we don't. I mean, right now, I'm not sure what's going to happen. And do we, as a franchise, do you want Benning to make trades when he's going to be out the door and you don't know when he's going to be out the door? There's rumors that he's not even supposed to be making trades. He's not making decisions. So I don't know if those rumors are true, but it's a hard situation. I think if you bring in a new GM, or even just a new coach at this point, maybe see how the talent will work in a new system, new voice in the dressing room, maybe do that. But at this point, I think a trade is more likely to happen maybe in the short term, but it's tough to say. I'll say that right now because there's just so much stuff up in the air. There's talk about they're looking for a new GM, they're looking for a new coach, while Benning and Green are still in their position. So it's an unfortunate situation for all parties involved, right? So
I'm going to let Peter start because I know he's got a deal figured out to get a new center.
Yeah. I'm targeting Elias Pettersson mainly because I want to. But it would be funny if the Maple Leafs were able to try and bring someone like him in as a 3C and then allocate all that money to $7+ million to 3 centermen. That'll just be hilarious. But realistically, I mean, I always wanted Connor Garland, but they signed him long term to $4.9 million. I assume that he's probably going to be in their long-term plans. But considering that they need help on the left wing, I'm looking at someone like Tanner Pearson, mainly because of the fact that, production really hasn't been great this year, 6 points in 21 games. But this is a player who has been, a 4-time 40-point getter. And on a really good team, he was on a really solid LA Kings squad, a Vancouver's Canucks team in 2019-20, where they were looking really strong and things were heading in the right direction. So he has the capabilities to play alongside really great players and produce. So I think maybe he's the kind of player that I think could be a target for the Maple Leafs if and when they decide to make a trade, because he does have that, top 6, middle 6 scoring potential that they're desperately looking for.
How realistic do you think that is, Matthew? What do you think Vancouver would need in return to get a player like that?
I mean, Tanner Pearson, under the coaching staff right now, he's one of the key players for Travis Green, and he's always playing with Bo Horvat. It's like there's the Sedins because they just never get separated. It doesn't matter how bad the team's playing and how bad they're playing; they're always playing together. And Pearson, I think what he does is he's overpaid, but I think a trade could be done. Like Peter, like you said, he's a veteran presence. He can pot the odd goal, but if you want empty net goals, he's the guy to go. Like last season, he had a ton of empty net goals, but one of the seasons there. So I mean, he's still a useful forward. I'm not sure he's placed well in the top 6, but I mean, on a team that just needs that veteran guy that in the playoffs, he's probably a key guy to go. And I mean, as a return, I think the Canucks would probably look like maybe this is too much. Look for a 2nd round pick at least. For me, I mean, he'll probably only fetch a 3rd rounder or a mid-range prospect, but I'd be looking for a 2nd round pick if I was whoever is the GM at the time.
You could be at this point.
Yeah, right.
It would be an upgrade. Alex, who do you want from the Canucks to be wearing Maple Leafs blue?
So I think one of the Leafs' biggest problems this year has been their lack of a good top 6 scoring winger on their left side. Obviously, I think with the departure of Zach Hyman, I know we all miss him. He really stepped up his game last year and the year before, and I think the Leafs are hurting a little bit. They've tried a number of different guys in that top 6: Ritchie, Bunting, Kerfoot, and Kerfoot have been all right, but ideally, you don't want those 2 guys being your top 2 left wingers. So if anyone on the Canucks, I remember hearing a rumor that they were considering moving JT Miller. And so he'd be my guy if I'd look to add somebody from that team. And I think between COVID shutting down the 2019-20 season early, and then obviously last season was just a voodoo season in itself. And then there's obviously only been 21 games played this year. JT Miller has quietly been one of the better producers in the entire league. I mean, you look at his stats, 72 points in 69 games in 2019-20, 46 and 53 last year. He's got 19 and 21 so far this year. He's a great player. And I think my only concern with trading for a guy like JT Miller is that, considering he's got 1 year left after this year, he'd probably fetch a first round pick at the deadline. And, you know, you look at the Leafs' recent track records with first round picks. I mean, they traded their pick in 2019 for Muzzin. Obviously that I'd say that was worth it. They had to trade their 2020 first rounder to get rid of Patrick Marleau, which was a tough look. Obviously they ended up trading Kapanen for a first round pick to replace that. And then we all know, Kevin, I hate to bring it up again, but we all know how last year's first round pick, how that worked out for them, trading him for 11 games of Nick Foligno. So I overall, I'd say I'm pretty wary about moving a first round pick at the deadline. But if it's for a guy like JT Miller, who you know will slot into that top six and you know will produce, I'd probably be willing to do something like that.
So what's the return on that? Because you're talking about, this is no slouch, 5.25 million. So what are you going to have to get rid of, Alex, to bring that in?
In terms of cap space, I mean, I think you'd have to look at moving somebody who's making a lot of money. And I think if you're moving a first round pick, I'm sure there's a way you could talk to Jim Benning and get him to take somebody like Nick Ritchie in return. Not necessarily as part of the value that makes up JT Miller, but more of just a cap dump. It's like, okay, we'll give you, if you take Ritchie, we'll give you our first round pick and maybe like a B-level prospect as well. That's something I think if they were to make a trade like that, it would have to be one of those things where, you know, maybe they pad some extra value in order to be able to include that extra bit of cap space. And it would be a risky move because Miller, after this year, after next year, his contract's up and you don't know where he's going to end up. You don't know how much money he's going to command. But it would be an immediate fix for the Leafs in their top six. They haven't been as offensively driven this year as they have in the past. And Miller's a guy that, you know, you can depend on to score goals. So
what do you think, Matthew? Does that sound about right? And what do you see with Miller? I know that there's been a lot of frustration out of him that's been showing up on Twitter with reporters that are at the rink. So is he somebody that's getting traded, and what would that return look like?
I feel before anyone else, I think JT Miller is probably the guy that'll be traded first. There's a lot of rumors that are probably not true, but you know, there's smoke, there's fire, and about dissension in the dressing room and stuff like that. But like they both denied it. Of course they will. But I mean, I think it's a tough situation. I think like if anyone, I think Miller probably be traded first because he's a marketable asset. Like you said, this guy has been scoring ever since he got to the Canucks. I mean, he's over a point a game. I think he's maybe around a point a game. As a Canuck, I mean, he's been producing ever since he's got here, and is, you know, at 5.5, it's pretty value. His value that's a pretty good cap hit for a guy that's what he's doing, but you're only going to get probably a season out of him. Is it worth it? If he helps you win a cup, it probably is worth it. He's a great versatile player. He can win faceoffs. He can play wing. I think I don't want Jim Benning dealing with this. I don't want him trading him, in my opinion, because I don't think he'll get a good enough deal trading him. But you know, if he is traded, I think you look for at least a first round pick for sure. If it's Benning trading him, I do see Nick Ritchie being in that trade, because for some reason I remember a rumor about that he was after Nick Ritchie from the Anaheim Ducks when he was there. This seems like a trade that he would do have in the trade.
You just start to pick up on patterns with Jim Benning.
Yeah,
I was also just going to throw in there that if they do try to look for a prospect, I mean, Kyle Dubas has said last year he wouldn't be afraid to trade one of his top prospects. So maybe you look at maybe a Nick Robertson possibly.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not necessarily saying that he may be willing to part, but if it's the right deal and you're getting a good return and you're getting an extra year for JT Miller at a reasonable cap hit for what he does, then why not consider that?
Yeah,
So
I like that. Nick Robertson would be a guy that I think the Canucks could use. He's young, he fits in that core group. But again, I don't want Benning doing this trade. I just
all right. Mine's perhaps as outlandish as the Pettersson one, but I'm swinging for the fences because if there's one really, it's gotten better, but the defense is not where it was supposed to be. Justin Hall, there's quite a gif of him with his whole rolling over and unable to skate. He looked like me skating out there, which is not a good thing. I'm not confident in that top four. They're missing a piece, and I love Tyler Myers. And it's you guys know that I really wanted Jamie Oleksiak because of his size and that he pounds the body. Well, guess what? Tyler Myers does too. The guy is a beast, 6'8", 229. I know he's getting $6 million. He's got a couple of years left on his contract and everything else. But man, if you could add him to the Leafs top four, that is a top four that is very much a Stanley Cup favorite at that point, I would say. So plus we saw Jake Muzzin in both of the last playoffs go down, and to have a Tyler Myers on there. So the problem is, what would the trade be? I think that's another really high price tag that would come with that. First off, you got to find $6 million on the books. And we talked about the 5.5 with JT Miller. So maybe I'm going with the Nick Ritchie move as well in the first round pick and retain some salary. I don't know. But the other one I was thinking, and I know you guys are not going to be fans, but one of the new Liljegren or Sandin. And I know that that's going to hurt because of the way they're coming up, but they're both on the last year of their entry level. They're both going to need re-signing. That's going to be a problem. You know, that's kind of where I'm going. And I want this team to win a Stanley Cup this year. I don't want to keep building towards maybe being okay and maybe getting into the second round in a couple of years when these guys have developed. So that's where I am. I would go for Tyler Myers. Do you think there's any shot in that, Matthew, that Myers could be moved?
Yeah, well, if you were a portion of the Canuck fans here, you'd love it. He's a whipping boy over here, and it's just he's been up and down. I feel he's been really good this year. I think in what he's been doing, he's one of the higher minute men for the Canucks, and he kills penalties. He's not on the power play, even though he could be. He plays those matchup roles. He's been up and down, playing with Hughes, playing with a bunch of other guys. He's been everything, but he's got those defensive gaffes that everyone gets on him for. And in the playoffs, in the bubble playoffs, he was on because of his penalties. He took too many penalties, but I think it's because he's so big. That's why he takes the penalties. So, I mean, I don't want the Canucks to trade him because I think he's still a key part of this team, but you know, for the contract he's under, I think the Canucks would like to get him off the books because they do have to trade. I mean, they do have to sign Brock Besser coming up, Bo Horvat, you know, and the entry-level contracts of Höglander and Podkolzin will be coming soon too. You need the money. So I think they probably would look to trading Myers. And, but yeah, I think if a lot of people in Canuck Nation probably wouldn't think Myers is worth a first round pick, but I think he is. I think a team would put that forward, especially if they get the cap space. And he has been pretty good this year for what he is. So I think it's a realistic thing to actually see him traded. I'd love if the Canucks get a first round pick out of it, because that's what I think the Canucks have got to work at now. I don't think this season is going anywhere unless there's a drastic turnaround like the St. Louis Blues did a couple seasons ago. It's hard road to come back from going at this start. So I think the Canucks need to recoup, get some first round picks they haven't had in a few years. Just, you know, sell whatever you can. And if you can get a first round pick out of trading Myers, then I'd say go for it for sure.
All right. And how about my Leafs friends here? Out of the three guys that we talked about, which one do you think is most realistic that the Leafs might actually pursue?
I'm a little bit biased here, but I think of those three, I think Miller would probably be the most likely for them to go after, because like you said, Kevin, if like they're going to you want to win a Stanley Cup this year. And I'm not saying that JT Miller is the one piece away from winning a Stanley Cup, but I feel like if the Leafs are truly going to go for it this year, I feel like he's the guy that could potentially bring back most value in a trade. So I'm going to stick with my guns and say Miller.
Yeah, I like that case, and I also like Peters with Pearson, because he's a playoff grinder. He's the kind of guy you really want in the playoffs that could fit in well.
Just to build off on Alex's point too, I mean, this is a guy that can hold his own too. Like, he's not going to be pushed around. This is a guy that's going to be going into the corners, and like you said, this is a guy that's built for playoff hockey. And if they need to give up a first, give up a really good prospect in the process, the fact that you're getting another year out of him speaks volumes. And the fact that he's making 5.5 right now, if maybe you could get him to 6, especially if the cap is going to go up in the next year or two, that's probably going to go well for them. So you have that leeway. And not only that, do you also move on from contracts like Alex Kerfoot, like Pierre Engvall, because that's just going to free up more space in the future.
Right. Okay. Great talk. Thanks so much, Matthew, for coming on. And we feel bad for you. It doesn't make any sense that this team that you get to write about is struggling so much. But I don't know what else to say there. We've been there. This is Leaf Nation.
We know and feel your pain. Don't worry.
Yeah.
That's all the time we have. Sorry,
there was so much optimism too, and coming into this season, I think that's the biggest thing why it's so hard, because you look at the roster. Why are they struggling so much? It's hard to watch, especially when you know there's so much that could be with the talent that's right here right now.
Absolutely. Yeah. All right. Well, I feel bad. I don't know how to leave it on that point. But brighter things ahead, Vancouver fans, maybe just not against the Leafs, but that's where we'll leave it. So thanks again. We got some great conversation here. Turn this into some more articles, see what the Leaf Nation thinks of maybe getting some Canucks, and see where things go from there. And make sure to leave your comments below. Let us know what you think of the show. Ask us some questions. Whatever you want to hear on the show, we'll get to it. So that's all the time we have for the Maple Leafs Lounge. Thanks again to our special guest, Matthew. And as always, my good friends, Peter and Alex. Have a great week, everybody.